Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hey, I want to start with a word of gratitude. I am so grateful that each of you have availed yourself this afternoon at 4 o'clock. You're right. And we're starting right on time as promised. I thank you each for the love that you have for this church, enough to come back on a Sunday afternoon and to hear about some of these plans. Um, but what we're going to start with is actually a quartet. We're going to sing a special. That's what y'all came for, right? Um, no. In reality, what we want to do tonight, I know you have some printed materials in your hands. I do want to offer to you, if you would like to pinch and zoom and scroll in, you can't do that on paper, but if you wanted to point your phone at that QR code, you can get that same printed material on your phone, or if you brought any other device. So you can scroll in and get to the fine detail that's there. That might be helpful to you. I know that on 8.5 by 11, there's only so much resolution that you can put up when it's right in front of your face. So I hope that's helpful. Let me um, let me start with a word of prayer, and then I will introduce some folks to you, and then we'll just start sharing. Okay? So let's go before the Lord in prayer. Our gracious God, we thank you for this church that you've planted here in Devine so long ago. And Lord, I thank you for the this new opportunity that you've laid before us, and the heart that you're stirring up amongst your people, that's creating great cause and concern for the future of your witness here in this community. Lord, as we hear tonight, we pray that you would open hearts, that you would open minds, and Lord, that we would discuss freely, and that we would hear your voice, and that as we go from this place, we would do so with great encouragement that you're leading us in whatever that might be, no matter what's on paper or not, and that you're calling us to a bold and new future that will be a greater witness than we could ever imagine in and for Divine. So, Lord, we thank you for this grand opportunity we have tonight. We pray this all in Christ's name. Amen. So I have good news, and that is the choir is at 6, so if we hang out long enough, all of y'all can join choir rehearsal too, okay? Um, with that, let me introduce a few folks that will help in our presentation tonight. The first is Daryl Harriman. He is the chairman of our building steering committee. He's taken on that task. He's also the chairman of our properties committee right now. So he's had a great influence in much of these conversations that have taken place really over the last 2 years. Also next to him is Ed Pierce, who's been a participant in our properties committee, also serves on the building steering committee, and has weighed in heavily in leading this initiative as well. And then I want to invite Mr. Mark Todd, who's with Vision Bridge Consulting. He's going to join the quartet up here. He just doesn't want to admit it or accept it yet, or the firing line. But he's with Vision Bridge. This is the architecture firm that we enlisted, how long ago? A while back, a year and a half ago. That part of the work that they produce for us is what's in your hands tonight. And so they're going to do most of the talking, but I'm going to tee us off with this. In 2020, when I accepted the call to be your pastor, we were running about 250 people in worship for about 2 months before COVID, and everything went sideways after that. But over these last 5+ years, our attendance has increased. We're about 400 on Sundays right now. We have property that we've purchased in the last decade. We have potential to reach more in Divine as the church continues to grow year over year. The Lord continues to provide growth to us. And so that's one element of what has brought about the conversation that we're looking at tonight. Another element is the awareness that for those of us who've been around here with any tenure, as you go around, you know that much of our facilities management has been reactionary. We do one thing and then we have a new need, and so we put something here and then we put something there. Like that used to be the pastor's office back in the day, and then it moved over yonder, and then it moved over here. And so what we've been trying to do is plan a more proactive approach of how do we maintain these facilities and prepare these facilities for the future rather than simply reacting to needs and maybe not having the greatest foresight and preparation that we've had in the past. That's not a criticism, it's just simply an opportunity for us to maybe shift in how we approach things. And so In the last few years, we've started conversations. It started with our properties committee about how can we begin to position ourselves to address issues that we know are mounting. This is a building that's crying out for attention that I know many of us are aware of that we'll have greater conversation about in a few minutes. And how do we even begin to position the church to reach some of those who we know are coming to the community or will be soon coming to the community? So that's what's started the conversation. And that's where Brother Darrell and Brother Ed and others have come in. So I'm going to let y'all kind of pick up and I will just go from there. And by the way, there will be a time for questions, but I'd really like for y'all to hear from them as y'all become aware of how God has led these committees to produce the work that's before you tonight.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? You can probably hear me without this.
No, you want to use the mic because we are streaming. So
Streaming. So he says, I have to use this device. Is it working?
What number is it?
It's working. Okay. A little over 2 years ago, in a business meeting, Dan brought up the fact that in the second service, we're reaching capacity. And when people come in, they cannot always find an easy place to sit. So we had a church council meeting that wasn't very well attended. However, one of the things that we talked about was how could we take the load off of the second service? And one thing we talked about was going to 3 services, and one of the services would be during Sunday school. And we talked about all the conflicts that would raise and then the pluses and minuses of that. And we could not find a clear path to do that. Coming out of that was the idea of just look at our existing footprint, our existing sanctuary, our facility. What can we do to handle not just the people that we anticipate that may come into Devine, and we're anticipating lots of people doing that. You can look over at Lido, you know, Castroville, you can look at all the houses going up, and how are we going to be ready? But we were looking at the time, how can we handle the people that we were seeing coming in on a weekly basis? And so we then reached out to Vision Bridge and Mark Todd and started talking about ideas. And originally, we didn't know quite what to do with this sanctuary other than we need to do what I call major maintenance on the sanctuary, especially on electrical, heater, air conditioner, control circuits, other things that involve the sanctuary. And we started looking at what do we need to do in terms of making room for additional pastors as the church grows, where we're going to put them, additional classrooms, where we're going to put people. And then, so when we went through this process, it's not a straight line. And so we didn't go, we're going to go from here to some design. And at the sanctuary, we didn't really have an idea what to do about it, okay, to be honest. And we were looking at remodeling, but then it came up, how are we going to remodel without disrupting classrooms and people? We're already at the point where we have most of the classrooms are taken. There's only 2 classrooms that are not being used, and they're over in the children's area. So how are we going to remodel? Just like living in a house, and someone comes in and completely remodels it, what are you going to do? Set up a tent? No, that doesn't work. And so as we progressed, we realized that the multi-purpose center is what I call it. It serves a number of purposes. One thing it does, it allows us flexibility into remodeling this sanctuary or the offices or other or the education area without a complete disruption, where you can then move people into the new classrooms, remodel the old ones. So it was a progress. And like I said, it wasn't straight line, where then we said, okay, what are we going to do with the sanctuary? And we have a number of quotes for rewiring for this sanctuary. We've also reached out to people to put in fire alarms, smoke alarms for this building, for the whole complex, for everything we're going to build in the future. We've reached out to people to give us quotes for doing that. And we also realized, at least me personally, rewiring this sanctuary And if we're using the sanctuary, there's no guarantee that on a Sunday you'd have electricity. And I know we got promises from everyone that said, hey, by the way, by Friday we'll wrap up our work. And this is like a 10-week project. And you'll have all your electricity back on Sunday. And we go, maybe not. And personally, I couldn't quite figure out how we're going to do that and still guarantee that there's not disruptions. And you can talk to the people in the sound room about the problems they do just to make sure that we have the sound room connections. In fact, we're chasing down some electrical issues now about why there's not a light on the tapestry back there, and chasing down other issues that have come up because of things we've done in the church. Sounds minor, but and so then we realized, let's make the multi-purpose center the number one priority. Then we can address the other things that we see we need to address. The Properties Committee will continue to try to address those things that are urgent. So when people bring up that we may have a problem in the education building or a problem in other parts of the church, we'll continue to address those. And then if it's beyond our means, then we'll come back to the church under the Properties Committee to try to resolve those while we are addressing, a new multi-purpose center. Any questions of these guys? Okay.
Here it is. So he covered everything I was going to say. So I have very little to say, but I will say that I'm a fairly new to this church. Nancy and I have been members here 5, 6, 7 years. I don't know how long, but most of you have been here for generations. So a few years ago, I was on the missions committee, and we went to we knocked on every door at every house in Devine, and told them about our church, and shared with Jesus with them if they would listen. And ever since then, and I'm sure it started before that, we've had growth here in this church, and then what the leaders in Devine are telling us is we're going to have tremendous growth in the next few years, within 10 years. And I will tell you, I love this church. And I know that we can't have every one of those new people come and join us at this church, but every one of them that would like to, we need to provide a place for them, because we know 100% for sure that they will hear the truth about Jesus here. So I've stood up here several Sundays and said to you, let's pray. We had a 40 days of prayer and fasting. We had a 24-hour prayer vigil. My thinking is, if we all pray and God directs each one of us at the end of the day, when the time comes, we're all going to have the same idea and the same vision. And whatever that is, I'm sure will be sufficient to handle a lot of growth. That's what I have to say. I hope that each one of you have prayed and thought about this earnestly and thinking about the future. Next speaker is going to be my friend Mark Todd.
Okay, now I've got some questions for you. No, let me share a few things with you. So we've been with your building leadership team for a year and a half now, and it seems like a long time, but the fact is we have studied every inch of this church campus. And that's important because every church needs a master plan. And that master plan paints the picture of where we're at today and where we're going to go tomorrow. And we have short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals. And it allows us to use that information that we organize together to kind of paint a roadmap to the future. And so we looked at a lot of different things. We studied a lot of different things. And as we began to hone in on the best plans for the church, the multi-purpose building it started to come to the top. And so that's what we've focused on. That's what we've been working on. And that's in front of you tonight to kind of see what we've been thinking, what we're talking about. And this building, it includes enough room for athletics, major fellowships. It can be used for worship when something else is being remodeled and brought up to date. It can serve multiple functions for the church and really for the whole community. Is that type of a building. We get to add really decent size, nice size classrooms, and I understand that's a critical need for our young adults. That's something that's going to be valuable to you. So that we started putting that together, and when that happens, that allows us to start looking at the building we're in tonight. It's so interesting. One of the first things we talked about when we met together with your committee, we talked about this building and the needs that it had. And I think it was remodeled recently, maybe 43 years ago from what I'm gathering. So there's some of that going on. There's definitely some maintenance as far as all the mechanical systems, electrical, and even plumbing when we get to accessibility standards. So we have a very good building here that's structurally sound. It just needs a lot of tender love and care. And for us to get to that point, we get I call it a family life center. The multi-purpose building allows us, it opens the door for all of this to happen. So if we're thinking master plan, everything happens in phases. We start with one project in order to get to another project, and when we do that, that opens the door for the next one. Folks, our Vision Bridge team, we work with our Baptist General Convention of Texas. We serve as their architect team. And we get to go all over the state of Texas to work with churches, and we've got numerous First Baptist churches of anywhere in Texas that you can think of. So, and I wish I could say all First Baptist churches anywhere in Texas, they're all the same. But we know as a Baptist church, we're different from any other church in the state. Devine has its own culture, its own needs, its own ministries, and is different from any other Baptist church in the state. But there are some comparisons. There's some just a couple of projects we've been working on that are kind of examples as to what can happen. We're working with First Baptist Church of Lorena, just south of Waco, and fairly similar in size, I believe, to this church. And so their guess what their first building was? It was it's really a multi-purpose building that's they are going to move their worship into that building. They had to build a larger building to get um, more people into their church. So their worship building's just too small. So their first step was to build a building they could move into, and that is the first step of their master plan. And real similar to what we've done together with our team here, we looked at 3 or 4 options to that church campus before we decided on, yeah, this is the right one. Another church we're working with just up the road from Lorena is First Baptist Grandview. And they have an older campus. But they bought like 25 acres almost right across the street from where they're at now. And their very first building that they're going to put on that campus is a multi-purpose building with the intention of they can have larger services there, they can reach the community better, and it just starts to open the door for them to do everything else that they're going to do in the future. So this is just kind of things that we're seeing in the state that would indicate that this is the right step to create a basis for growth. Another project that is just finished, we work with First Baptist Cedar Hill. See, I keep saying First Baptist all the time. First Baptist Cedar Hill, they completely redid their worship building, their existing worship building, and they had to remodel their children's department. It was not in very good shape, and so we worked that project with them. And as we did that, as we were able to remodel that entire sanctuary, the church met and they had a family life center, a multi-purpose center, and that's where they were able to meet while they spent several months remodeling the church. So I believe the steps that we're taking are correct for this church to grow and reach the community that you want to reach. And so I wanted to just share a couple of examples with you. Would you like me to talk about budget? Okay, now for the fun part. We've got the building that we're looking at with the additional classrooms, a really large kitchen, and I believe this church loves their kitchen, so we're gonna have a really nice one set up for there. We've got 7 large classrooms, elevator, appropriate restrooms, appropriate storage, and so that all sounds great. So how much would something like this cost? So our building is 19,500 square feet. And we've got accurate budget numbers, and those numbers would be a total project cost of right around $6 million. And I want to explain what a total project cost is. That would include the building, the furnishings, lighting, sound system if we need any of that. It would include the engineering, the architecture, any of the what we would call soft cost that would be covered in that number. So that's the scope of cost magnitude on a 19,500 square foot building. And we were comparing the Cedar Hill job to this one, similar, had a larger worship room. There were some pretty good comparables. And that would put a project of remodeling this building in the probably $1.5 to $1.8 million range. And we're talking about major everything. So we're not just replacing the carpet when we're talking numbers like that. So I think it's important to have a grasp on that. We want to be a little more conservative on those numbers. We'd rather have that number and be able to work it down a little bit if we can, but I don't want to give you some number that sounds great, but we're never going to get there. So that's a handle on it at this time. So yes, sir. I'll give you, Dan, you want to pass the mic around? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, the question, or go ahead, Tommy. Thank you.
So the initial question, I guess, that we'll launch tonight is, what is the estimate of time it's going to take to build this new building that you're talking about, rather? And then what is the estimate of time it's going to take to remodel this existing building?
Okay, and that's a great question. Construction time of construction should be in the 10 to 14 month range. 12 months is kind of typical for a building like this. So once we start construction, that's how much time it should take. And that's the new building. This existing one would be in the 6 to 8 month, I'd say 6 month time period, because we got a roof over our heads. So unless there was a delay in material or something, major equipment, something of that nature, those time frames would hold true. Let's add to that comment, though, that's if we started construction, let's say tomorrow. So a couple of things have to happen ahead of that, and one would be us moving from schematic plans to construction documents. And that'll take us, you can do that in 6 weeks, can't you, Jonathan? No, take him, how long you think? Yeah, 3 or 4 months on getting the construction documents ready, and then there will be a period that the church will control, and that'll be your fundraising. So I don't know that number, but 3 to 4 months for architecture, somewhere around 12 months for construction. While all that's going on, this building could be done in the process and just move right into construction if that's what the church wants. Part of that on our part as your architect would be working with the city and making sure everything's right with them. We'd meet with them a couple of times ahead of finishing and make sure they're on target. The other thing that would happen would be working with whomever a general contractor might be to make sure our budget targets are staying in line and not going crazy. We want to know from the start what it's going to be, and when we get finished with the construction documents and the church signs a contract, we want to know that that number is just staying true as we go.
So I have some concerns today because the budget is not right now. Can you provide some context of parking and center? Like you talked a lot about classrooms and worship space. I don't know how a gym. Like I can have fellowship space and a big kitchen without a gym. So can you explain how you came up with the plans and requirements for this other building, and how you also decided on where to put it?
Okay, so it needs to, there's 2 or 3 questions there. I'll share them. If I miss something, wave your hand again, and I'll cover it. So first off, the location where we put it's on the parking lot behind the education building, right? So we wanted it in a place where when people come to the building, there is a known central location to get to everything. So we want people to be able to get to the fellowship hall, up to here, to the children's building, to the gym. We want that to happen in a central location instead of creating a situation where we're walking here, there, and everywhere trying to find how to get into it. That was the location strategy. The help me out. What was the other? Why? Why? Well, it doesn't. It's an athletic sized facility. The size of that facility is based on how many people we can get in there for an event. There's 2 ways you're going to have multi things happening in that space. You're going to worship there for a while. And the way that it's designed, you're going to be able to get 400 to 500 people in that room for worship. And that size building will get you about 550 people in worship. It's also going to get you about in the 400, 450 range, let's say for a church-wide family meal, that type of thing. So if we're going to that size of a facility to do those types of things to meet the size of this congregation, if we add a little bit of height to it, it can be used for athletic activities. And so that's kind of the logic behind how we got that size. It was not sized just to put a gym floor on it. It was sized in order to meet the needs of the church in all different kinds of activities. So that was the logic behind that. And do y'all want to add to that, guys?
One of the things we looked at was access for people that have back surgery or people that are seniors. Currently, we have classes back here for seniors, and that was done intentionally so that they wouldn't have to maneuver all through this complex. With that facility over there, you enter over there, say you're senior. If you're senior and you're running relays and all that, that's fine. But if you're senior and you need more help, then your classroom would be there, your worship center would be there. And then when we move back over here, then again, you have easy access for those people, okay? That was one of the main considerations when we started this whole process, is that what can we do to ensure that everyone has easy access to the facility? Okay. And then, as Todd was pointing out, when we looked at that, the floor plan was laid out so that we would have enough room for worship. And then at the same time, what else can we do with that to outreach to the community, or outreach for our youth, having the youth move over here so they have a facility that they can use. And because they're currently in a facility over here that we know long-term needs to be remodeled. Okay? That's kind words.
Trying to picture this sanctuary. I believe the goal is to have a seating capacity of about 650. Is that right, Pastor? 650.
This will still
Oh,
this will
okay.
still
So
have 2 services.
okay, because you can't add too many more here unless you tear out all
If
that area.
I know it's hard to see on that diagram, but it's proposed that with the remodeling, we be at 414
Okay.
about.
All right, so we're really not getting much of a bigger sanctuary at the end
At
of
it.
all this process.
Not a larger sanctuary. We're not talking about modifying the footprint, but we are talking externally or the perimeter of it. We are talking about modifying the interior footprint. And so what we're talking about adding is about 120 seats on the first floor.
Okay. I'm sure y'all went through this process of what order and what buildings, but you probably considered, why not build a new, bigger sanctuary while we're still worshiping here? And then when it's done, we move over to the bigger sanctuary and do something with this building. What were the reasons for not going that route?
Sure. Or you want to go ahead?
We looked at building a new sanctuary. Actually, the cost was going to be more than the multipurpose center, and it didn't serve as many purposes in terms of logistics and moving people around out of classrooms as we remodel. We started the process by looking at remodeling and what we need to do, both with the offices and with the education area. And that still needs to be done, even if it's not part of the total remodeling of the church. That is going to be disruptive. The multipurpose center, it serves so many more purposes than just the sanctuary would have, not trying to badmouth a new sanctuary. Okay. Thank you. But that was the thought process, David.
And
One second, Martha.
Are you
Yeah, I want to make one additional comment. That was thought about and considered, and it was, seriously thought about. But this is why we came to this decision for this project. Yes, sir. Yeah. Right.
Go ahead.
I hear you. Yeah.
One of the things that Todd brought to us is we have 6.5 acres, and with 6.5 acres, we have probably a maximum capacity of 650 people that we can support, bring in here, worship on a regular basis, because and that is based on numbers that they see with other churches that are going in, and so for us to look at a building that we could have 850 people, there wasn't a path forward for that given the existing footprint.
Yes.
You mentioned the multi-purpose capability of the Family Life Center. I hear worship while we need it, with the intent of moving back here. I hear athletic facilities, large church functions, but I mean, is that facility going to be something that would also serve the community in ways other than just for the youth, for athletic opportunities? That been discussed with our at all?
Yeah, I'll make a comment and then pass the baton. But I believe it's a perfect size. If you have annual events like a Thanksgiving meal or anything along those lines, it helps the entire church be able to fellowship in one spot. If you have a fall festival, Thanksgiving, anything like that, it works. It's not my church, it's not my building, but it can definitely be opened up to the community. And do y'all want to talk about those ideas? Yeah, I'll look at pastor. Yeah, that's a pastor question.
That's a pastor question. Sure. So, Martha, to answer some of your question, there are ministry opportunity abound with a facility like that. We can even think about our existing ministry commitments like Vacation Bible School, an annual event that has a recreational component that for the last few years has been disrupted by weather in some way. It's heat or the rare occasion of rain. We could easily and probably preferably move those events inside in an air conditioned space for the safety of kiddos. That aside, I can tell you as someone who's coached in youth leagues, there is a ripe opportunity for us to bring our youth sports leagues here, and we can set any sort of parameters around the opportunity to share the gospel with coaches and kiddos in the course of that. And that's aside from ministry opportunities we have for every generation, I would say, during the week to offer um, increasing physical type ministries for an environment or a community that has a lot of sedentary related medical issues going on too. So there's ways that we can use that every day of the week as long as we recognize in this building, if we feel led to build it, that it's not something just for us. It has to be something that we position as an outreach mechanism for the benefit of this community. It has to be positioned that way. You're welcome.
Oh, it's on. Okay. Thank you. My question is centered on persons with disabilities and the aging population and access. So the central point is going to have an elevator there. On the exterior, I see stairs, but will there be a ramp in the event the elevator does not work?
No, there will not be a ramp from the second floor. The ramp would be unattainable, really. It's just too long. But we have stairs for egress. We have the stairs on each end of the building. That's why the stairs are on the outside, so nobody would ever be trapped in a fire. Somebody needs assistance, we're going to have to help them down. The fire marshal, this meets all the fire codes in the state, which, believe me, the city's fire marshal will be all over that to get us to do what's right, and we want to work with them on that. But that's how that's working. We have ample restroom facilities. They all meet accessibility standards. So,
okay, I have questions. Please hear this in the note of I accept we do need some updates and upgrades. Do we have month over month or at least quarterly numbers to show the growth? My perception is we saw a big growth after COVID, folks moving here from different states and folks getting out of their houses. And so there was a huge boom in participation. Have we seen that continued growth, or is this primarily based on projections of numbers? Second part of that question, or I guess second question altogether, have we looked at different options? I hear some different questions based off of Brandy's question there, or different options looked at. Did we look at renovation of this building, maybe combining with the existing structures so we could still have multi-purpose space in between? Is a renovation simply too costly versus building a new structure? Essentially, are there more cost-effective solutions to adding space, including adding seats to this structure as we renovate it and finding a lower cost solution to serve some of these purposes?
You want to tackle the second question first? Okay.
So concerning space, it's all about capacities. How many people can get in a spot and function? And if we look around our current footprint, we're better than we're over maxed out in the fellowship hall. This group tonight, and my goodness, this is the best 4 o'clock group I've ever seen in my life. So this is awesome. But we'd fill up the fellowship hall in a heartbeat. And we know we need more space here. We've talked about we wish there was more space than we can get with this building. So if we're literally limited in capacities, we have to enlarge something or build something new. The volume of space that we need a new building. We can't even if we built only a classroom building. We can't just maneuver something around and add classrooms. So if we extend this, we're losing these. We are losing every classroom in the building. This whole building will be devoted to worship. So we have to start doing those things. And it's a church. It's a church call. So we want a fellowship hall, the multi-purpose building that can meet the needs of a church family gathering. And then how do we add those classrooms to all that? We got a big building. There's nothing small about it, that's for sure. But something along that's towards that scale has to happen to handle the growth that you have. And the growth, as we are understanding it, really feels sustainable and moving in the right direction. So.
For your first question, I don't have a report available today. So yes, there was some bit of a great thrust coming out of COVID. But beyond that, there has been a sustainable increase quarter over quarter. Even now on my desk, there's 20 visitor cards that families have filled out from the past 3 months that I'm praying that God would raise a couple of teachers for a new Sunday school class for that, frankly, we may miss that opportunity on because I haven't been led to anybody. So there is that big jump. Y'all are part of that, by the way, right? And praise God for that. But there's been that increase quarter over quarter too. I just don't have a Excel report or something to show you tonight about that.
I have a couple of comments and I guess a question. I've got a million of them, believe me. I could hog this mic all day, but I do that at home already. So, first of all, I want to start by just making the comment that the function of a church, if I understand what the function of a church is to preach the gospel to the lost and to minister to the saints. That's the gist of the church. We preach the gospel to the lost people, and for the saved people, we minister to one another. That's what we do. We grow, we study, and we edify one another. If as David Cook just stated a little while ago, if we're building a new building, that's really not going to function as our worship service center. All it's going to do is be a temporary worship service center while we're remodeling this place so that it becomes back to our permanent worship center again. And we're really not adding much more space. We're adding another 100 to 120 seats, which, by the way, I think is great. It seems to me a very steep price, $6 million price, to pay for a 6 to 8 month delay while we remodel this place. That's a very, and I want to get into numbers later. I don't want to get into numbers now because we really haven't got into numbers yet. But the other thing I wanted to make a comment on, if we're going to use that building for youth sports associations, and I used to coach those for years. I coached all that stuff. And we use the school facilities, and we just did, and I think they still do it today. But I can't see how that is going to minister the gospel to anybody. I mean, I've coached all those teams. Are we going to make them, before your game starts, you got to watch a sermon for 20 minutes? I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, we can have a Bible tract available for somebody to pick up at the door, but I don't see how having a basketball league in our facility preaches the gospel to anybody. I just don't see how that can function in a meaningful way. Whereas if I take $6 million and instead of do that, I take it and I send it out to Voice of the Martyrs or through the Bible radio, they can broadcast in 2 or 3 different new languages in new regions of the world, or minister to people in North Korea or some places where things are really bad and the gospel really isn't heard that well. I don't know that facility, just to give us a 6-month or 8-month room to be able to hold service until we come back here, is really the wisest use of our money, or not our money, God's money, to be able to do what needs to be done as the church. That's the first thing. One other comment that I'd like to make.
To that, and we can keep going. But as an outsider, I'll say a couple of things. Um, I'm I'm an active church member. I'm a home church in Huntsville, Texas. I'm a deacon there, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I serve the Lord with all my heart. And I would agree that if all we got out of that multi-purpose building was a 6-month timeout to put people back in this building, I would not recommend building it if that were the intent of that building. And we're talking about a lot of money, and so it's the responsibility of the church family to pick out its mission and its goals on how you want to reach Devine, and that's preaching the gospel. Buildings are nothing. The heart and service of the church is everything to reach people for the lost. We could build a tent and preach and reach people for the lost. So the only way a building like this multi-purpose center works is if this church uses it as a tool to reach people. So that's why we consider these things. In my mind, I do not want country club churches. They don't reach anybody.
I agree.
And they die they live a little while and then they die, just based on the age of the club members that they would have at the time. So Devine has its own ministry. It's how you reach this community. This is a tool that the committee has been studying to make that happen. So that's my comment as your architect. I don't know, y'all want to speak further to that?
If you look at the things that the multipurpose center will do for you, one is it moves your youth away from the Stadler building, which long-term needs to be, I've been corrected on this before when I made the sign like that, it needs to be demolished and rebuilt. Okay. We also have a need for additional classrooms. Multipurpose center takes care of that. We now have 2 classrooms available, but they're not available to anyone that doesn't have kids or anyone that hasn't gone through safeguard and background checks, which is I have to do for my club. And so those are not available for if we wanted to turn those into adult classes. Okay. And then the other thing that we looked at is how do we take care of the existing problems here without completely disrupting the worship service, okay? And there may be other ideas, and we kicked around a bunch of them over the last year and a half, and so, okay. Thank you.
The other comment I wanted to make was back in the heyday when I first started coming to church here in 1998 when Charles Bush was still the pastor. And at the time, we were the largest Baptist church in the state of Texas, south of San Antonio. We were averaging just over 300 people at worship at that time. And I think it peaked under Glenn Young when we were just about 325 on a given Sunday morning for worship service. At the time, still being the largest in the state, south of San Antonio. We then broke up at some point after that into 2 services, 8:30 and 11. But since we've done that, we haven't come close in the time since then to filling up the pews. I was at 8:30 service just 2 weeks ago, and I was a little bit curious. So I actually at one point counted, and there were 92 at that morning service at 8:30, and at 20 persons in a row, we would have had the entire 8:30 service in the first 5 rows with a few seats to spare and the entire rest of the church available. I'm normally here at 11 o'clock. I'm here maybe about half and half. And at 11 this morning, we probably had a little more than half of the pews covered and maybe about 40 to 45% of them empty. And that's been going on for years. So we've got lots of room even now. And I would love to add another 100 seats or so, because I think that would ensure that we got plenty of room no matter what, when, or how. I just think that there may be better ways to do it than what's being proposed. That's kind of where I'm led to voice my concerns. I too am a praying person. I think just about everybody in this church knows that I spend lots of time in the Bible, and I don't want to be leading anybody down the wrong path, and I certainly don't want to sour the milk. But that's where I feel led. I just don't see this church busting at the seams. Now, someday we might, but when I was on the school board back in 2005, they told us back then, I was on the school board from 05 to 08, this place is going to grow very fast. When we get to 2020, we're going to have a boatload of kids here. Our numbers at the school really haven't changed much from that time to now. So just something to consider. That's just my thought on it. I wanted to share those comments. And again, I got more once we start talking numbers, but we're not talking numbers yet.
I have a question. Some concerns of why the decision was to use the parking lot instead of the property that we have across the street. I've heard that multiple times.
Well, that's a good question. So part of the strategy is to use the land across the street as parking. I think the main reason here's a strategy I have as a church architect. If I can create space where the church family can essentially stay under one roof and move from one place to another effectively, that's going to serve the church better. I would, real openly, I would not want to see a really strong active building across the street from the campus for two reasons. The main reason is just safety, and the other is when you do have weather, when things are going on, it's just more difficult for people to move from one place to another, especially if we're dealing with adults and seniors. So we can, in my mind, we can move youth, we can move young adults. They're pretty flexible to go anywhere. But when we start talking about the age demographics of the users, that's the main reason we put it over on this parking lot instead of, it's really a future parking lot.
So the other thing is, years ago, the church decided that we had basketball goals outside, and they didn't want it. They took them all down because of the liability and cost of insurance. It's interesting to see that this has got an auditorium in it with a gymnasium for basketball and athletics that's going to increase the cost to the church. And I'm kind of like Tommy. I'm waiting until we get to the numbers to understand that 2/3 of this building is a gymnasium. And with the numbers that you gave, that's somewhere around $308 a square foot to build this with a big open area for the athletics. And I'm looking at the cost down the road. Your insurance is going up. Everything's going to go up just because of the building, because of the activities that are taking place in the building. And then I'm worried about funding also.
Well, we're seeing, just as a comment, we're seeing churches get hammered over the insurance issues. The words that we're hearing, they're all about the physical campus, not the the numbers I'm hearing hadn't gotten into the liability type issues, but I'm not an insurance expert, but we see that as challenges. You know, and back, it really is the heart of the church. How do you? You don't have to have a two-story building to minister to people, but you do need more work. You do need more fellowship space. You just don't. Your fellowship space is not relating to your attendance on Sunday. So, from what I'm hearing.
I know everyone's concerned about disruption if we were to refurbish the sanctuary first. It's all on how you market it. If you make it an exciting time, in that, yes, we are going to have to use the fellowship hall and maybe the chapel and a couple classrooms and stream the services so that we can get this sanctuary up to code so that more people can worship at a lower cost. It's all how you go about doing it. Yes, I know there's a challenge also with classroom space, but we can also put a temporary door halfway down the nursery wing so that we can still protect the children, but we can use those other classrooms that are not being used. These are things just to consider. So that's what I wanted to bring up.
Question about the wiring. I'm in the choir, and I hear all the time that we've got wiring issues. I don't know anything about electrical code. I don't even know what size gauge wires we're supposed to have, all that other things. The other thing that I was noticing with the way the plan is drawn out for the sanctuary, RAV Center up there, in the picture that I've got, the schematics that you handed us, looks like they're going to be crammed into a very small room. Look how far they've spread out now. It's going to be difficult for them just to get their job done with the schematics.
Well, and that's a good observation, and we haven't gotten with the team to that room can get wider. We'll just get them centered up, and I would imagine when the whole system gets reworked, the AV and lighting will all be part of that too, I would imagine. So we'll configure that one out. I'll let the church experts talk about the wiring.
Why me? We're looking for volunteers to be the head of the properties committee. Just raise your hand, okay? Okay. When the wiring was put in originally in this building, it conformed to code at that time, and it still does conform to the code that was when this building was built, which means that you have conduit, but you don't have grounding wire running through the conduit. Conduit serves as a ground. And then going forth, that's not how we want to wire the sanctuary. There's also been a number of jury rigs, and then we have corrected those. David Brighton, Jeff Howard have worked on that and corrected issues, okay? And so we also, people were running wire instead of putting conduit, took the easiest route. And so all that needs to be corrected, okay? Insulation on the wiring, and to pull wire through the existing conduit, we really need to replace all that. So we also know that we need to put in smoke alarms, fire alarms, We need to do that for here. We're waiting on a quote, but we also need to do it for the whole facility, even the one that the multipurpose center. So there's a lot to be done, and honestly, I couldn't say that we could do this and without disrupting your sanctuary and your worship. And the other thing, it's somewhat beyond the scope of our properties committee. You know, we've received a number of quotes, but the ones that are probably the most reasonable were $350,000 just to do the rewiring. We have a couple of quotes a lot less than that, which implies they probably didn't read the scope when I sent it to them. Okay, and but if you're asking me, am I guaranteeing that we'll never have any problems? And no, I'm ask the next properties committee chairman. Okay. Thank you.
If I may add and concur with Tommy, the same sentiment, but if I could be the first to say that an athletic multi-purpose building sounds awesome. It really does. I personally, growing up in sports and sports ministries and the heart that God's given me for that type of ministry, that sounds absolutely amazing. But given the scope and the cost and the where God has us as a church right now, I concur with Tommy that does just seem to be like we're reaching a little too high. Could we put more thought, more energy into figuring out a way to remodel this building while worshiping somewhere else apart from that extra building? Whether that be creative ideas like using this space here in between the buildings somehow, whether that be planning ahead for, covering it somehow that turns it into future usable space, future classrooms later on, whatever that may be. It sounds like it may be worthwhile putting some more thought and energy into that aspect.
At the mic, and here is just a thought. I was on a school board too, and the same thing, Tommy. I can identify with what he's saying. I can identify with what he's saying in that you're told as a board, oh, the growth is coming, and we did do some things to get ready for growth, but then the boards after us did not. And we didn't really see the growth coming like we thought it was going to come. And then all of a sudden, it's there, and you're behind trying to catch up. You need a facility, and you're just behind. I don't know if you can just wait till you're just overflowing. I don't know if that works. I'm just saying, I see the pros and cons of everything right now, but that is a thought. I did have someone pass me a question since I have the mic, is what have you considered the cost of the employees that you would have to have for a multi-purpose facility? What kind of cost would that be, I wonder?
We would be talking about at least 2 additional staff members to support that.
And that would be like full-time just to support.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello? Okay, cool. So I have a question regarding the master plan. What's happening across the street with the chapel and the current youth building? Are we going to include that in any renovation plans, or what will be the purpose of those buildings? And I have a second question from an anon person who's asked me to ask the question.
We haven't discussed what is going to go on with that part of the property yet.
Okay, awesome. The second question is, has there been any consideration given for 1 floor versus 2 floor for the multi-purpose center?
Yeah, I'll just make a comment to that end. That can definitely happen. I think we would need a two-story portion for classroom space. But that's an option in my mind if it eliminates any athletics is the bottom line. So that's all. That's what it does. And so so a lot of I want to just share this. A lot of if we only use our new multi-purpose building for athletics, I think we would be missing it. It has to be used for all different kinds of things. If it were single story and was a fellowship hall and could be used as worship, could this and that could happen to it. It's not, the cost difference is minimal compared to elevating that ceiling some. That's kind of the logic behind it. We would want to, if we built it for all those other pieces, that would happen in this one too. Another thing we didn't mention, I forgot to mention it, but our current fellowship hall, we would be able to pick up some classrooms in that space and probably create a fellowship area for 50, 75 people, something like that, for smaller events. If you have a funeral in at the church and you're ministering to the family, that type of environment would be good for the family. It's a perfect size place for showers, for birthday parties, for any kind of a class party, something like that. It would be plenty of room, but a little more intimate feeling, and enhance those type of activities too.
Clarification, you're saying the building cost for having a gym is a little bit more, but that's not talking about the long-term operating cost, which is the 2 people or liabilities. That's what you're talking about. Just
Yeah, I'm not talking about the insurance side of things or the staffing side of things. That's the church. That's the church's management.
Okay, I have we did this thing where we prayed and fasted for a period of time. We signed up. And the thing that kept coming back to me was 2 Chronicles chapter 24. And it talks about repairing the breaches in the temple. And then 2 days later, I wound up having a conversation where that person brought up to me the same chapter. And I thought, well, maybe that's confirmation. And I have raised the question about, but from a different standpoint now, it has occurred to me through that 24-hour period. I'm not against a new building. I think it would be, the gentleman back here, an awesome thing to do. But what I find keep coming back to me is, are we being good stewards of the space we currently have? And we don't know the numbers for all these things yet. But we build a new building, and if that stretches us significantly, how are we going to repair the facilities that we currently have? We've been given talents. What are we doing with those talents, with the parable of the talents? Are we maintaining them so that they can be used appropriately? And if we incur, now listening to other people, we incur additional expense for more staff members, that's further impact for us to be able to complete what is shown as phase 2, 3, 4A, 4B, etc. So that's a concern that I wanted to bring up based on the prayer and fasting that we were asked to do. Second thing, and maybe it's just two minor things. You talk about a 19,500 square foot facility. You've used that number a few times, but on the drawings we have that were handed out, it says 19,000 even. doesn't say 19.5. So I don't know if that's just a
No.
misquote or whatever.
Is that a misquote, Jennifer?
But
That's a misquote. It's 19,000.
19, okay. But the other thing I'm looking at, and maybe it's just because I'm a detailed person, I look at things and colors stand out. On the what looks to be the front page, I see what's in blue. It looks to be structure, but that's not reflected anyplace else on any of the drawings or even the external drawings. It's not reflected. So was that
That's your current fellowship hall location. That's what that is.
actually that blue or that blue rectangle that sticks off the corner does not exist currently?
Yeah, I think we're trying to get a porte cochere and we haven't gone into that. All it is a space holder for what we could do in the future over there. That's all it is.
Because it's not reflected on
It's
any of the other
it's not
drawings
in
anywhere. So I'm like, okay,
it's not in the mix of what we're talking about tonight. And
kind of like, why is it there if it's not reflected anywhere else? That's all.
yeah, it's just a space holder in the master plan. And I would like to share, kind of tie back to what you've shared. Actually, some in my mind some dynamic things, and what everything you were sharing with us is talking about master planning. That's what we're talking about. Well, I don't want this to sound horrible, but whatever, I don't care. That sounds horrible. I don't care which part of the master plan we start with. We start building the master plan now. Whatever is best for the church, I care about that a lot. And so we're looking at where we're sitting tonight. It's dated. It's not quite big enough. We have needs in the children's department. We have needs in the church offices. They're really fun to walk through and try to find your way around. And so we need more adult education space. And so we have all of these needs that need to be addressed, and we got to start somewhere in a master plan approach. So working with the committee and talking to them, the product that we're talking about tonight is a tool that could help put all the pieces together. That's how we got to this point. They've looked at a lot of options all over the campus, and your leadership team. See, now I'm blaming you, Daryl. This is the tool that we've picked out tonight as a step to put all the pieces together. So that's the logic and that's the thinking. And I think the way that building, that the next step, let's say that building is used, that depends on the ministries that this church wants to reach people with. That's all it is. It's just a tool. And so, but I appreciate your comments about that's the correct way to strategize. Those are the right questions to be talking about and putting together a master plan, just as an aside.
We have a question coming, but let me do this. At the end of football games and basketball games, there's like a 2-minute warning. We're going to give ourselves a 20-minute warning, okay? Because we will have some other events going on tonight. So with that said, Brother Tom.
So, like Tommy, I have a million thoughts, but I'll share them as concisely as possible. I have seen churches that went through building programs that outgrew those building programs that fast. as I understand the history, the people of the 50s that were here in the 50s struggled and sacrificed to build this building and the education building. And we talk about the fact that we got to do maintenance and upkeep. Okay, the people from the 50s did a great job of building these buildings. We've not done a great job of keeping them up. Okay, I don't think that's a surprise to anyone else. When we talk about, we could talk about wiring, AC, heaters, AV, we could talk about a lot of stuff. Okay, so we have to move forward. Okay, I don't think God wants us to stand still. I think we've got more faith than that, and I think we want to move forward. Carla mentioned the school board situation where a bunch of people said, growth is coming, growth is coming, growth is coming. And then the next generation people said, no, we don't have any proof. And then it came, and they were behind. Okay? I know we're stepping forward, okay? But I think that God would have us step forward. I would vision us stepping farther forward than what we are, okay? I hate to tell you something about elevators. I worked in hotels for 31 years. You can't have one elevator. You got to have two. Because, and I know that elevators are like the most expensive thing in this plan, okay? But when one goes down, you're in trouble. When you only have one and one goes down, you're in trouble, okay? And elevators are expensive to fix. So that's just a side point. But I think we need to think about an infinite God who would like us to move forward. I think that everyone in this room thinks that we should move forward, but we have a lot of ideas about how. So we need to take what our forefathers did, be thankful for it, worship in it, take the next step, live in faith that there are people coming. If the people aren't coming, we're still going to use these facilities, and we'll find ways to use them as we do. This church is creative in finding ways to serve. I think about the food distribution. Okay, that was a project of Devine ISD that the school district partnered with the church to take over. And it's a big deal, and it's a big deal for our community. I'm not a sports guy. I'm a music guy. You guys all know that, okay? But I still think the idea of having a bigger space for events and being able to upgrade this and to expand and move towards the future is a good idea.
Hello? Until you have to pay for it. If this I agree with that. But we have to be good stewards with what we have. If I have to see the ceiling tiles fall down, it just, this church is, when I have family members come over to visit, that's the first thing they say. People don't want to have weddings here because it's an awkward layout, including my daughter. And she loves this church. This church has to be renovated first. Why can't we have this phase one? And if you're saying because you're going to disrupt us, disrupt me for the cost of $6 million, I will be disrupted. I'll take all my class across the street to my office. Ask us. We'll bend over backwards to figure it out. The building across the street, the Sadler building, that was a big expense that we did. To hear that you want to demolish it, we can gut it and make the offices back there very nicely. The lady who donated for that chapel would be horrified to hear that you want to demolish it. It's just so much waste that I'm seeing. That's my opinion.
My wife and I came here about 3 years ago, and we came from a church that had just gone through a building program when we joined it that did build a family life center and use that family life center while they completely enlarged and renovated their sanctuary. That family life center became the family living room for the church and was used for everything the entire time that we were there for 10, 15 years. It was used by the youth, yes, for sports, yes, but for many things that sitting here I can't even remember. For things where they invited the community in, for overnight campouts that they used to reach out to the community, for many other things. The church used it to offer programs to the community of many, many different type things. The adults used it for outreach. The adults used it for weekday outings that they invited the community to. The community used it for emergency sanctuary during evacuation periods. The church was able to offer it to the community for many, many things. It wasn't just used for sports. And it had 8 additional classrooms in it. So yes, it was a large sports facility, but it wasn't used as a sports facility only. And it was a large expense. But the church paid it off ahead of time through God's blessing. So don't limit God. So I'm just offering it that it can be used to serve the community in many ways that we sitting here today are not thinking about. And it will avail us the easiest way to not disrupt our current campus as we continue the additional phases. Now, my wife and I have seen it work. That's all I'm saying.
This is probably a Pastor Dan question here. I was wondering if there's going to be a planning component, not just the component to building, but is there, to go along with that, is there going to be a planning component to, okay, these are the ideas that we want to do with these buildings before, so that when if the buildings are built, that once day one, the buildings are built, that we can just jump into what we want to do with that? Or is it going to be this, we're going to build the buildings and then we're going to just decide, oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do that with it?
Pass it and then you can read it? No, we're not going to do that, okay? Sorry. Y'all know I don't get political. That's the first thing that came to my mind. That's an excellent question, Richard. I think in some sense we've talked about some opportunities that there are. And in some sense, too, I think that there's an invitation for the congregation to dream and imagine, to be very imaginative about what we sense God wanting us to do with the building if we position it as a tool like Mark's been talking about. I think in some part we've talked about some of that, but I think there's more conversation and planning and prayer if we even commit to building this. as to how we would fully utilize it. To say that we have that today, I would say there's still more room for us to consider that too. Yes, sir.
Thank you all for presenting this today. I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Is how do we pay for all this? And it's a lot of money, and I know if God wants us to do it, He'll make it happen. But I think that we need to be really careful about not being the kind of steward of whatever we have that God would want us to be. If we end up putting any of this together, $6 million is a lot. 1.8 million on top of that adds up to a whole bunch more. And we haven't even talked about how do we keep the carpets clean, the bathrooms clean, and the doors open, and the facilities available for the community, and who, and all of those kind of things. We have $13,000 a week requirement, and we've met that the last 2 weeks, which I'm really happy that we have. But we would probably double that if we end up with a $6 million facility over here. We'll probably double that $13,000 requirement. And I could see enough of us being a part of this church that would be burdened and lose sleep at night figuring how, where does this all come from? And even if it started with a bang and we were all doing really good, and we're being good stewards of what God has given us, and we're putting it where it needs to be in this church, things happen that decrease income from time to time for not just one or two, but maybe a lot of us, and yet we still have that $26,000 a week requirement just to pay the overhead and pay the preachers and pay the custodians and all that. It could really be a burden to us down the road, even if we paid the $6 million off just like that, which I'm still curious about. But it could end up being an unintended consequence of what we're talking about doing if we end up doing it.
And generally speaking, to add to JJ's point, because he wasn't on mic, although he's loud enough that he should be on mic, you can't tell what kind of price increases we're going to have with materials and stuff tomorrow. And obviously, if you're going to start going out for bids 6 months from now, the prices 6 months from now may not be what they are today. And generally speaking, these projects come in over budget, not under budget, as a whole. And $310 a square foot is awful cheap for a commercial building. All of that being said, I told you I wanted to have one more talk about money when we finally got there, and I'm glad Bill opened the door to that. My understanding in the way this is proposed to be funded, we continue our normal everyday giving to maintain the normal everyday operations of the church. Over and above that, we have the pledge commitments, and those pledge commitments will be used to fund whatever projects we end up going with, remodel, brand new, or both, or none, whatever the Lord leads. But if you get 300 people in this church, and I presume you're going to have one person from a family being the 300 people, so my kids aren't going to pay, my wife's not going to, it's just going to be my family. So if you get 300 families and each one commits to $1,000, well, you're talking $300,000, and that's nothing. If each 300 families commits to $10,000, well, now you're at $3 million, but you're still not halfway there. I'm concerned by the time you're dealing with all of the phases and with the time that goes by, you're probably going to be nearing 10 million. And that is a lot of money to be committed. Now, can God do it? Absolutely, positively, without a doubt. But it is the same infinite God in First Baptist Devine then it is the same that is the same one at First Baptist Castroville. There are many a church that has bit off more of a financial apple that they could chew, and they went broke. I don't want this church to end up that way. And I don't believe God has boundaries where, well, he just wasn't infinite in that church because they didn't have enough faith. I don't think it works that way. I think we need to be prudent with what we do. We need to make wise, reasonable decisions and remember that the goal of a church is to preach the gospel to the lost and to minister to each other as believers. I mean, that's what we do. And I mean, no one's mentioned this, but it seems to me that if we need 6 or 8 months off, we can rent the high school gym. We can rent Rick's dance hall. There are things we can do to hold service somewhere that's large and it's cheap to do so. We can all congregate there, have our worship for 6 or 8 months, and then come back here with great anticipation to this brand new painted building that we're going to be looking at with all this extra seating capacity. I just think there are other ways to do it, and we cannot presume upon the grace of God if we're not going to be wise stewards with what he's provided.
And I think they've stole most of my thunder here, but we've got, y'all have come up with a plan. You spent a lot of time on this plan. What is plan B if you cannot bring in enough money to make payments on the building that we're talking about building?
Let me talk about these last two comments real quickly, and they're very valid, they're very real, and they're good comments. And I want to share with you kind of the agreement, the way we work as architects, as Vision Bridge. We're designing schematic plans for the church. And our fees, we make money for that. But you're not paying for full architectural fees. You're paying for schematic design fees. And the reason that we do this is that we want to protect the church, all of our churches, this church. We don't want the church to find itself in a situation where you bought, a $250,000, $300,000 set of plans with all the engineering attached to it, and then we find out, we can't build this building. We do the plans the way we're doing precisely for this. So we're going to have plans that are accurate enough for a general contractor to give you an accurate budget bid on, so the church knows what the cost is going to be. So someday when the time comes, this church is going to vote on a project and it will have a number attached to it. And whatever that project is, whatever that number is, the church will vote. And at that time, it's when you go into the full architect engineering fees, you're going all the, when you do that, you're going all the way. But your committee is working with us in a way to where you have flexibility. And we've used our flexibility. So this is not a night to feel a lot of pressure or burden, because the church is in a decision-making mode. You need to hear this information. You need to talk about it freely. $6 million is a lot of money. But we need to be talking about that instead of wishing we could get it for a lot smaller amount. With the church work that we're doing, it's really consistent with what we're seeing everywhere. And I will say this, if we're going to do something, let's make a decision and do it. If we delay, even in the best of years, and over the past few years they have not been the best of years. In the best of years, inflation is 7% a year. and it's been worse than that. We know. We live in it. So we could literally do a mathematical equation and find out how much it's costing us each month to wait, you know. So we do it at the right time, we focus, we figure out what we want to do to reach people in Devine, and that's how we march forward together in improving the campus in a master plan approach.
I think there's been a couple of great things talked about on the financing side, and as most of y'all know, I've probably met with just about everybody in here, probably more than once. But to use Tommy's numbers, if you have 300 families, it's a 36-month pledge drive kind of program. That would be about $725 a month to do the $7.8 million project. Kenneth asked that in another meeting, what's a car payment kind of thing look like? That's at 300 families. At 285 families, that's $760. At 350 families, it's $619 a month for 36 months. So that's kind of the funding strategy around that. There's going to be one-time pledges. There's going to be opportunities to give. But as far as having to make a decision that says we're going to do the entire master plan, I think today's a good opportunity to learn, as Mark had talked about, and the committee has talked about, to see kind of the different phases that are available. But much like the discussions we had in small group, we have to contemplate this based on where God leads us to give and what you see as far as growth in our church. So when we evaluate that, and when we look at the pledges going forward, and we look at what we're willing to give to the building fund or the Family Life Center fund, of which we already have a couple $100,000 sitting in those accounts, and people are donating to those accounts currently above and beyond their tithe. So to Tommy's point, this is an offering, right? I'm in agreement with that program and that process, of course. But I think we have to consider that as we agree to say we need to do something, and we say sometime, maybe in April, where we go, you know what, we need to move forward with something. We don't know what that something is yet. We know we like the idea of a master plan. We like the idea of going forward in phases. We don't know which phase we're going to be. I think that it's going to end up having to come down to, what are we willing to give above and beyond the operational cost, and what can we afford to do? So if that is $2 million to renovate the sanctuary, then it's $2 million to renovate the sanctuary, and we have to figure that out. If it's $8 million to do the whole thing, then it's $8 million to do the whole thing. But we have to really contemplate that and not get hung up on, Daryl and I were laughing about it today, but the seat size, the color of carpet. That's not where we are. We're not at that point. We're not at theater seats, right, Bill? We're not there. We're at that point where we need to decide, are we going to go forward with trying to really rehabilitate our church? And that level, from a funding standpoint, whatever God chooses, it may be $10 for some, it may be $100,000 for some, and it may be $20 for others, and that's okay. We're going to have a time at the end of March where we can choose how much we want to give, and what we're going to pledge, and what we're going to put forth over this 36 months. And if we stay on track with that, that's going to help dictate how we move forward with the phases of the plan. Because we can only do what God leads us to do, and part of that's going to be based on what God helps us fund. And I do believe that if we come together and we decide, in an offering standpoint, and I'll use the pledges as an example, if we decide that we can give, let's say somebody decides that they can give $500 a month. I will say that when the pledge drive is over after 36 months, if those funds are already allocated to the church, they tend to stay that way. it's just how it kind of works when it's set up on auto payment and auto drive. It's just like investing in programs. Once you kind of set that up in motion, it stays that way. And those additional funds and resources will be there at that same point in time to be able to afford the staff and the upkeep and the upgraded cost, because now it will be part of your routine. It's just kind of behavioral finance on how some of that works. But I think that's what we need to kind of wrap our arms around. Are, do we want to move forward with rehabilitation of the church? And then we back into it and say, what does that funding cost? And it probably costs a truck payment for most people in here. I mean, that's about what it has. I think Ken asked that in one of our meetings, and it was a great question. So we did the math then. But instead of going for 6, I just put the whole amount in there because that just gives us about where we are. And instead of counting all the kids, to Tommy's point earlier, we got 285, 290 active families in our church right now. So your 285 number puts us right around $760 a month on a 36-month pledge drive. For those of y'all that can stroke a check, feel free. That's $27,368 for a one-time gift. As your campaign director, I would gladly appreciate that. Was that a subtle plug, Jeff? But I think we need to look at it from that kind of perspective on what are we trying to go forward from. Evaluate the funding in your own personal circumstances, and then do what's best for you and what you feel you're led to do above and beyond your offering. And then what the church has to be a good steward of is the resources that we're given to be able to do that. Because we're still going to operate the church. To Daryl's point, I'm on that same properties committee with him. We're still going to fix the stuff in the sanctuary. We're still going to fix ACs. We're not stopping any of those programs. So none of that stops because we're doing this. So I don't want there to be any misconceptions about, oh, they just want to do this, so now we're not going to do anything with safety. No, that's not the case, folks. We're going to continue to be good stewards of the resources that we have. But we also want to have a good plan to walk down to say, you know what, we have funds for phase 4 instead of phase 1. So let's do phase 4 and figure out how that would work. And I think we have to be good stewards of that as well. But that's what we've been talking about in the different conversations for those of y'all that have missed that. But we're not at a point today where we're worried about the color of carpet and the type of seats that we're working on. It's, are we ready to rehabilitate the church? And are we ready to Tom Marshall's point, are we ready to step in faith that God's going to open that door for us to do that, both financially and with time and reoccurring funds to be able to afford that going forward.
So, any soccer fans in the room? We're now in stoppage time, meaning we've gone over the 90 minute of the game. Was there a real burning question or comment? Community meeting? There is a church leadership event that's happening at the community center on Friday night. So for those who've had an invitation to that, they're invited to come, and that's really a celebration time that's going to coincide with the fundraising element of all of what we're talking about doing. So that's Friday night if for folks that have received that. It's a church thing. It's at the community center. We're having it there just so we are meeting at an alternate location, a space that would be really unique for us, gets us outside of our normal confines, and maybe allows for us to gather as God's people to celebrate just the fact that the Lord is leading us to do this. Because I haven't heard anybody say no to doing something. It's what are we going to do? So it's really about that. That's why we're having it at an off-site location. It's not.
Those who received an invitation
Mm-hmm.
can go.
Yes. Anyone who's a leader in the church, meaning they serve in some committee, they are a teacher in some capacity, those types of things. Going once, going twice. So the next question is probably, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? And I think Our steering committee has received quite a bit of feedback tonight, and I thank you all for that. And I think what would be prudent for us is, as a committee, is to take that feedback and to confer to determine what the next steps are. Would that be fair? So maybe you can leave this place with the promise that in the next few weeks you'll hear an update as to what we'll propose as the next step. Ultimately, what I would be suggesting to us is that whatever plan is presented to us, tonight was just a proposal for a plan. Whatever plan is ultimately presented, the church will need to vote on and adopt. And then we'll see about funding as well, as Reagan was just talking to. But in that, though technically a simple majority would accept that, I'd really like to see something of a strong majority in whatever it is we're voting to adopt. And so my thinking is, we say that it's 80% to call a minister to the church. I'd like to say that whatever we propose, we're looking for 80% at that point, whenever that comes. So just know that I'm going to suggest that we're not going to position something that we're not majority, like strongly majority in favor for. So the committee will take this feedback tonight. In the next couple of weeks, you'll hear an update that I will probably announce from the pulpit as to what our next steps are. It might be another town hall style meeting where we offer some new perspective, or I'm sharing with you a forthcoming business meeting where we're putting forward a recommendation. I don't know at this point, but that's just what's coming. But one thing I will say is, I don't know about these guys who've been on the firing line with me, but I very much appreciate the passion, the love for this church, and all of the thoughts that have been shared. If anyone is worked up about this, just know you've been at a Baptist church tonight, okay? There's always going to be lots of thoughts and opinions voiced, but that's what makes this expression of Christianity so much fun. And so don't leave this place upset or anything like that. We've just shared from our hearts about where the Lord has us right now. And we can trust that by the time we bring something, the Lord's going to bring us together on this. I know that because God has a good future for this church. We've just got to all do the work together to determine what that is. So there's no pressure tonight. You just have had a presentation of a proposal. We've heard lots of good feedback for which we're very appreciative. And so there's more to come. There's more to come. Okay? So that's intentional, and I appreciate that question. And for just to address that, all that to some of what Mark would be talking about in protecting the church, we don't want to overcommit to what may be something so far down the line that we don't know what tariffs are or whatever else is that point, that it may not be great to represent what's phase 3 or phase 4 in today's dollars, because who knows what 5 years dollars might be from now. So that's even why you only see so much detail in the first 2 phases, because those are in the short or middle term perspectives rather than what might be longer term with 3 and 4, if we even went with that. Thank you. Well, you said something about that you can take the microphone in your home, and I wondered, does Tommy have a microphone in his home? Okay. Sorry, my mind went down a rabbit trail when you said that, brother. Yeah. Anyway, I appreciate you. Someone I haven't heard from is Brother Gerald in the back, and I wonder, would you close this in prayer tonight, brother? Thank you.